There's a cat over here. There's a cat over there. And the wrong one died. And the wrong one died.
Welcome to The Wrong Cat Died, the podcast breakdown of the catastrophe. I'm your host, Mike Abrams, and today we have another amazing guest. She was Victoria on the U.S. National Tour for multiple times. So welcome, Natasha Davison. Thank you for joining me.
Well, I am actually delighted to be here and talk about cats. Being in the National Tour 4 was a really long time ago, so I haven't had the opportunity to discuss it for a while. But it was a really big part of my life back then, and it was just a great experience for me.
I'm going to make you dig back into that vault and think back of a lot of moments that you probably have not reminisced on in a long time, which is what makes this really fun.
Hopefully my memory,
yes.
pun intended,
Fun
is okay.
intended. So let's start at the very beginning, because I find this, I always love this question, especially for people that predate the 1998 movie, because almost everybody I talk to was currently on tour, the most recent tour, it's like, oh, I watched the VHS and I was obsessed with it. But you were on tour before that movie came out. So I always love to hear, what was your first experience with cats? When did you see it first? When did you learn about it? Like, what did you know before tour?
Well, I was living in Boston at the time. I had always danced and sang and had a really strong background and foundation in dance, as a little girl taking ballet. But in college, I studied journalism, and I went into television journalism and was a producer in Boston. At the time, that Cats was a huge hit, first in London and then in New York. So I knew about it because I always was a huge fan of musical theater, loved musical theater, always trying to find ways to engage with musical theater. And so I saw the first national tour of Cats in Boston, and that was the first time I saw the show. And I just loved it. And of course, fell in love with the character that I eventually played. And that was actually about a year before I ended up getting the role. So it was kind of interesting that someone had told me, in a year, you actually will be playing a role in this show.
So when you were watching it that first time, you're a producer.
Yes.
And but you also danced growing up. Were you watching it from the lens of a performer or from the lens of a producer? Like, did you go in and say, oh, here's how I could do this for that? Or here's how I would love to dance the solo number for Victoria?
Purely from the position of an audience member and a performer. Very attracted to the production as a dancer, because the skills that I had as a dancer, you get to have this individual, beautiful part. That character in particular has quite a few special solo moments. And so I was really drawn to it, just watching the performance. And wow, I would love to have the opportunity to dance that choreography and play that role.
Mm-hmm. So as a dancer, I do also think it's fascinating, because I'm not a dancer, I'm not a singer. So I watched the first time I saw it, which was 2016, from a story perspective. And I think that's why we're here today. Did you catch most of the story, or were you more enthralled with the choreography?
When I was watching it?
The first time you saw it.
I don't think anybody gets the story. I mean, honestly, I know that there's always a discussion when a new company's put together. I was a replacement in the tour that I joined, so I didn't have that, full company meeting where they take you through what the narrative is that they've built, within the company. But no, I don't think anybody gets it. I think it's more for the performers to tell you honest truth, not rather than it being sort of an explicit journey. I mean, Andrew Lloyd Webber took T.S. Eliot's poems, which are Victorian era poems, with the facade of cats, but it's really about, human beings and the human experience. And then Gillian Lynne came in and, frankly, beautifully and brilliantly created movement and choreography to support those poems and the music, which was, a combination of musical theater music and rock and roll and synth. And it was really revolutionary for its time. I wish you could have seen it back then, like these original versions, because it was so different. You didn't have anything like that. It was immersive. I'm not a theater historian, but Cats really was one of the first that took that set fully into the audience. The cast was roaming around the audience. They got to touch and see the cats, up close. And the way that they lit it, the kind of music, the narrative, which was not clear it was more atmospheric and character driven than specific story plot driven. That was really a new and exciting kind of theater back then.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I do wish I could go sit in the 80s and see kind of like the early piece of it, because it's modern theater so different. And there's a lot of discourse about that now, about what's selling and what's not, and what's creative and what's new. It was just such a different time. And I think it's also just a different era. You don't have TikTok and all these other things. That social media
brand
buzz.
new. People were seeing, it was this whole different kind of theater experience, really in every way, from the costumes to the sort of source material to the way that they executed it. And so I think that, people were really in awe back then, because in some ways it's a very, bizarre kind of thing. But I think what they did so brilliantly back then was to bring all of those elements together. The music, the poems, the characters, the costumes, the set, the lighting, into this really unusual and powerful experience for its time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's sustained. I think that's the other thing that's like, because it was so revolutionary at the time, it's now 40 plus years later that it's still going in very similar capacity. But I want you to take me to the audition process, and also how you ended up as the replacement, because that is a really big part of that you mentioned you missed, which is that, like, here's the story, here's the Felinity School, here's that. You come in and you kind of get thrown right in. Yeah. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you landed the show, but then also, how did you figure out the character development when you're not getting that moment in the rehearsal process?
Well, I think that I'm have a little bit of a unique experience, maybe as compared to some of the newer, recent productions or cast members coming into those shows. And that, again, it was still a first-class, full equity national tour that was given the time for casting and the time to rehearsal. There was no go in a week kind of thing. I had the full, I can't remember how many weeks we got. It was either 3 or 4 weeks, but it was a substantial amount of time to go through all of those elements. The other thing that I had the benefit of was that this fourth national tour, which eventually became the only national tour, was populated mostly by cast members from the Los Angeles company, which ran, I think, around 2 years. And they learned the show from Gillian Lynne and the original director, choreographer, Andrew Lloyd Webber. They were all a part of that company. So I had the benefit of hearing what they learned by learning the show from the people that originally created it. It wasn't, 10 steps removed. It was, so I heard what Gillian said specifically about my character and how I was to dance the solo. And, Andrew Lloyd Webber actually at that time still came out and visited our company. So, I also had the benefit of talking to him about the show and my character. And I don't know if younger companies have that opportunity, but it was still pretty close to the core original creators.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now what did they tell you? What is the Victoria backstory that you heard directly from the original people?
What I heard was this, and I wrote it down so I could remember.
Oh, amazing.
From the lips of Gillian Lynne, is what she said about Victoria, is that she is a pulsating plum ready to be picked.
Pulsating plum ready to be picked. Wow. And that fascinates me, that you get that line and you've got to build your whole character arc off of that.
It was enough.
That's all you need.
I totally understood it. I think that they really, something that I don't know how much is infused into, other companies, but I know that when they talk to us about casting and the different characters, they were really focused on the uniqueness of the inner life of each character and how that manifested itself physically, vocally, facially. So I think you saw a real distinct uniqueness back in the 80s and the 90s of these cats with those original creative teams. And I don't know how long that continued with people that still had the benefit of the knowledge of the original creators. But, Victoria needed to be a particular size. They like to have particular facial features. The same for any of the kittens. They needed to be small, like the Rumple teasers that we had were tiny, stocky, gymnastics type women. The Cassandras were super tall and skinny, and there was a distinction between Cassandra and Victoria. So there was no, it was never a homogenous looking cast of just the best dancers around. Everyone was very good, but they had distinct ways of moving and they had very distinctive body and face types. And I felt like some of these other companies that I saw, I didn't see that as much, that difference in each character on stage, which I think gives it a depth that is necessary.
Yeah. It's an interesting part of the show because as someone has talked to a lot of people now about this and has seen only more modern productions, you know, really of 2016 forward, and what I can find on YouTube or whatever I can find on the internet, there has been a change. And there's been some that I think has also reshaped at least some of for me, the story arcs of it. So when you have a younger Grizabella, it's harder for me to accept her as a Joko choice. When you have a younger Jenny Anydots, it doesn't make her feel as motherly necessarily, and sometimes. So I do think that some of those changes maybe are part of where the chaos of the storylines kind of comes from over the years and where you see some of these differences versus I think what I'm hearing you say is a while back, it was cast very specifically to fit the story.
And I think that's really important for its success. You know, when you look back at those original companies, that the way that it was constructed and all of those replica companies were very successful and ran for decades. I don't know how long, it was 20 years or so. So why was it so successful? You have to go back and look at some of the elements that, fueled that. And I think one of them was Gillian Lynne's choreography. She knew when to be still. She knew when it was okay to have a frenzy on stage and the energy of the full company doing something. She knew who should be dancing which number and who should not. It was never random. It was never like, here's dance steps that go with this music. It was, why would Victoria be dancing this? Why would she not be dancing that? Why is the company suddenly hits a freeze like cats do? And why does the company or a particular character go, skittering about like cats do sometimes? And I felt like those elements were there. Then. And it's very easy to make it a 3-ring circus.
Totally.
And then you don't know what's going on. You don't know where to look. Like I thought they did a great job of helping to focus the audience towards a certain thing at a particular time, which balanced the show and helped you kind of flow through the experience, which I never heard it as much of we were given a storyline-ish, but it was really more about the characters having this experience together. And then, of course, the reckoning for Grizabella, which has a satisfying ending, speaking as a producer.
Yeah. So we're going to get to that because I have deep thoughts there. I want to hear a little bit though, because you're given one sentence essentially, which gives you the backstory of what you need to go. But then you also are staged a certain way. You're told when to dance and when not to dance. What elements do you remember from Victoria's story that were like, oh, here's a moment, or here are a couple things that I have to do to kind of land her arc? Even whether it's a dance moment, a vocal moment, a piece of like who you're standing next to, like what are those moments?
Well, I think she has, of course, her beautiful solo in the very beginning of the show with that one pool of light coming from overhead. And that introduces her, and that's the beginning of her kind of story arc, I guess, if you will. And she's just sort of, having an introspective moment. In my mind, it's her first time coming to the ball, and she's exploring what that means to be a part of that tribe. And in this moment, again, that quote from Gillian Lynne, I think is very appropriate, that she's sort of exploring herself as a young woman coming of age and all the things that means. Yeah.
I've heard some Gillian Lynne quotes about that particular.
And so then she sort of takes that next step, I think, in the ball, because she's got a couple of pas de deux moments in there with, in my case, it was with Tumble Brutus. And she does, she's got depending on how the company is choreographed, in mine, Victoria did all of those moments. She does the big lift with Monka Strap in the very beginning. I don't know if the post-2016 companies do that. And she does the 2 solos in the ball as well. And most of the ball, in the videotape of the London company, capture. I think Victoria's not in quite as many of the ball sections, but in my company, I pretty much did nearly all of them that the girls were in.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were dancing a lot.
It was exhausting, frankly.
Yeah.
I had no idea. In fact, every show that I did after that, for some reason, I always felt like, I hadn't fully done it, because it wasn't like Cats, where at the end of Act 1, you are just, no matter how fit you are, you're just sweating bullets and out of breath. And it was an incredible experience, but boy, it was hard.
Did you have a city where you were just like, why did I leave producing to do this?
It was always harder to do in places like, say, Salt Lake City, where the elevation was really high. So they used to have, canisters of oxygen back there for us. So that was always difficult. And or if the theater was really old and had strange, challenges. I never had the feeling of, why did I do this? I always loved it. But some of those things were like on top of the challenge of the show, also having to deal with that. Like, I can't remember where it was, but there was some town that we were in where the theater had no crossover, meaning you couldn't get from stage left to stage right without going somewhere else. And in this case, you had to run through the lobby of the hotel next door, which was an old folks home. And so we would be running through this, and you had to run because it was the show was not put together with the thought that you were going to have to go next door to get to the other side of the stage. But the people in the old folks home started lining up and sitting like in rows on either side of this lobby to watch us run past and cheer us on like we were doing the Boston Marathon or something.
That's so fun.
Yeah.
Well, we'll jump to the segment, then we'll come back to some of the questions I have, because I love hearing crazy tour stories. So, like, what are some of the ones you remember that were either bizarre, funny, memorable moments from being on tour?
Let me think. Well, that was one of them. I really remember that pretty distinctly. There was another place, I think it was in Wisconsin, in the middle of winter. They also didn't have a crossover. You had to go outside. You had to go outside.
Tiny costume and run outside.
These unitards are thin.
Yeah.
Some people wore it under like a second layer underneath. I didn't like to do that. It just made me feel a little less connected to my body and the floor. But that was really cold. So I remember that. We also had probably the only company that played Alaska and Hawaii. So those were really interesting experiences. When we went to Hawaii, I believe it was the first time that Cats was performed in an arena. So we did this big arena thing with like screens all over the place, and Andrew Lloyd Webber also came out to that. They were experimenting with that. And so that was really interesting. We were sold out. It was 10,000 seats, people coming to see Cats out there. And I guess they don't get a lot of musical theater. It's just too expensive to get the set out there. And I don't know, they have to fly it or put it on a boat. I don't know what. But that was super cool.
So this is like a sports arena, and because they did I know in Australia they did like a circular circus tent. So that was probably while they were testing those things out of like, how could we do not necessarily bigger, but a different type of staging, because you have like less of a behind. I mean, I guess you're cutting off a corner of the stadium, right?
Mm-hmm. As I recall, they sort of had a platform. Like, it wasn't we didn't do it in the round. It was, there was a part of it that was cut off for backstage. And, it was unusual. It was definitely unusual kind of experience. I think that's the only time we did it like that. And they were testing out if it was still resonant for the people that were really far away, to have the big screen so they could see more up close. And then as a performer, you sort of had to keep that in mind as well, that you were performing to people that were pretty far away, but there was also this sort of micro view of your face or your body that you needed to be aware of as well.
Did you go to the audience in those stadiums? Like, did you still do green eyes out there? Okay.
Yeah, I think we did. And then Alaska, the interesting thing about that was that, again, theater didn't get up there that often. Mm-hmm. And so people came multiple times. They were so excited to have a show. They're like, we don't care what the show is. We're just going to see it 3 or 4 times. So that was kind of interesting to see people come back often. And then again, the community was so excited to have the show there that we would go out to dinner and people would buy our dinner, just say, oh, that table over there's buying your dinner because they're just want to welcome you to Alaska.
Wow.
So that didn't happen other places. So that was kind of one of the unusual aspects of Alaska. And we were there in the warmer months, so that was kind of nice. We were able to see some of the countryside around there, and it's just beautiful area.
What was the reception like in general? I mean, this is still so new. Like, it's not like now when Cats comes to town, people have a pretty good sense of at least, they can at least do their research and figure out what it is. But in the late 80s, early 90s, that's less possible. And then a lot of times it's going to be the first time that Cats has ever been to this city. So did you have any kind of mixed reactions, or everyone very open and like they knew what they were getting into? Like, what was the tour like there?
It was pretty universally loved. I mean, it was so unusual, and this was before computers and the common use of VCRs, and it hadn't ever been recorded at that time. So it was this really new, surprising experience for people. And I think I'm so grateful that I was a part of that for something so new and exciting. People didn't know what to expect when they came in. I mean, all you see is the two yellow cat eyes with some dancer figures in there. And so they didn't know what to expect. So you come in, there's no curtain, like the set is there before you, bleeding out into the audience. And then you're surprised with the type of music that it is. It's very synth based and electronic. And then while it's pitch black dark, the cats are out there in the audience surprising people. People really didn't know about that.
I didn't in 2016 even, and I was not ready for that. Thankfully, I was not on the aisle. So
people are, I think we spark them with that moment. We spark them with when they come in, something totally unexpected. So people, I think, the response was always like, wow, I just had a really incredible experience. They may not have known that there was some sort of narrative in there, but they did understand that it was a tribe of cats, that they were all different. They had different, personalities and different backstories, and that this one cat had a rough time and she was going to get another opportunity. So
yeah, I do love the fact of like people are getting to witness this the first time and kind of like embrace it. But
it was, the thing too, back when I was a part of it, it was, for a dancer, it was the show to be in. I mean, and Victoria, along with a couple of other parts in there, was one of the best dance roles you could have, if not the best dance role of that, whole era. I mean, at that time, this was Phantom of the Opera and Les Mis and a lot of more Tommy Tune type shows, which are kind of a rockette tall dancer. So for me, it was so huge to be able to have been considered for that part and then get it, because it was highly sought after. Every dancer in town showed up for those open calls for Cats. I remember I went to 2 of the large, big open calls, and from those I eventually got to a short list. And I know that what I did, of course, was I prepared after I went to the first one, and we knew what choreography they would be doing for the most part, that, you just made sure that I worked on that really hard. I, got some private coaching on how can I make my dynamics that much sharper, that much more powerful. And so that when I went back the second time to a big open call, I had this really beautiful moment in my life where we danced in like groups of 50. It was on a Broadway stage, and we came in there and we danced in a group of 50. And after my group went, the assistant stopped and said, okay, we want everyone to do it again except for you, Natasha. And I'm like, oh my God, am I in trouble? Am I get kicked out? What's going on? And he said, no. No, this is good. They could not look at anyone but you. That's all they saw. So you don't need to do it again. You can come over here and sit down, and they're going to look at the other people. That's
got to be terrifying for everyone else in the room, being like, oh, well, why am I here anymore?
It was I just, you thought you had done something wrong, but no, I'd done something very right. So that was great. And then from that moment on, I was then called into smaller closed auditions. At the time, the casting office for Cats and most of the big shows was Johnson Lip. and they called me in for the first time. After that, there was maybe 10 or 15 dancers there for Cassandra. I think Cassandra Broadway, and I didn't get it then, but I'm not that tall, so that wasn't surprising. And then the next time was for Victoria and the tour, and then I did get it that time, so that was pretty exciting. Although I didn't wait, I remember I was so anxious and so on edge about it that you're not supposed to do this. But again, the only way you found out, we didn't have computers. They have to call you. You have to sit by your phone and hope you get a call. I don't even think I had an answering machine at that time.
Wow.
So you're like waiting for the phone to ring. So I'm like, I can't take it. So, and I knew that this character needed to go out on the road pretty quickly. Like it was a very fast turnaround. And I just called the casting office, and you're never supposed to do that. But I called them up and I said, I auditioned for this, for Victoria for the road. And I know that it's pretty fast turnaround. Could you just let me know if they'd cast the role yet? And the person that answered the phone was really nice. He's like, what's your name? And I said, Natasha Davison. He said, Natasha Davison, hold on just 1 second. And so then he goes away and he comes back and he says, don't tell anybody because the producers are going to call you. They're just a little behind, but you got it. So,
wow.
Oh, it was so exciting. And then the process of being put into the show was also so exciting. Again, at those days, you have to go to the producer's office to sign your contract, which was just cool, to get to meet them and sign the contract, take a picture of yourself signing the contract. And then also in those days, you went to the Broadway house and they made this mold of your head. Everything was handmade for me. So they made a mold of my head for the wigs and of my feet and, measured every possible part of your body. Like they kind of put you in a unitard and they like around your fingers and your neck and like really drawing out your feet so that those slippers at the time were hand sewn for us from this very soft leather. I don't know what they do now, but, and kind of looking at your body contours about how they're going to paint the unitard and where they're going to place the fur, on the unitard. Like so Victoria doesn't have that much. And it was never, but some of the ones lately that has it more bunchy, but this was really kind of diffused throughout the whole unitard, which is just beautiful. And so just the process of them making the costumes and all of that was pretty cool too. I learned the show on the road, but the preparation of all of that other stuff happened in New York.
We're going to take a quick break and then we'll be back for more of The Wrong Cat Died. I want to go back to, you were in the production for 5 years, 6 years, I think is what I have, kind of on and off.
Years on and off. Yeah, I did it almost 2 and 3/4 years, almost 3 years the first time I went into the company. And then I went back pretty much every year for several months until 1994.
Yeah. So I think this is where I'm kind of fascinated about the differences. Because, that first year you're given your story and your arc and you're kind of playing off of what that first cast is doing as a replacement. But then each year you get new people, new actors, new performers, and different relationships. How did your Victoria evolve? Like, were there ever moments where not material changes, but like maybe you were slightly closer to playing a relationship with this character this year that you weren't the next year, not because of any different reason, but it was just a different person?
I think that's very insightful of you. Yes. Because we do have a lot of improv time in the show where we're engaging with the other characters around us. Now, in terms of staging, you can't change where you're placed on stage for that, but the way you interact with this cat or that cat might change a little bit.
Yeah. So so how does that impact the story for you? Like, what would you say is Victoria's, like, you kind of given the line, you've given the story, but like, what are the other relationships? Is she, like, I'll just throw a couple out. Is she Grizabella's daughter? Is she last year's Jellicle choice? Like, how much of this is even thought about when you're doing this on the fourth tour?
It was not just about.
Not at all. So
No.
that's all. I'm the only one thinking about these things with the fans.
No, I mean, you're reacting in the moment as your character with the other cats. I'm going to be different with, say, one of the other kittens, or like Syllabub or Tumble Brutus or Pouncival, than I would be with the older adult cats. A little bit more deferential to them. I'm not going to like go pounce on, Bombalurina. She goes swat me away.
Yeah.
Do something like that. But I might play around a little bit with the other kittens, I think. So that kind of, that would change with the people on stage, but it didn't really change my character or what I felt was happening to her kind of coming of age through the course of that.
So that's, I think that part's fascinating because now the current tours, the tour that just finished and went out for the last couple of years, and even the 2016 group that did it on Broadway, they're inundated with fan theories, and there's so much out there now. There's so much fan fiction and stories, and me talking about these things, like this type of thing exists, and they have those conversations on the bus. And I'm fascinated by you weren't having these conversations at all on the tour. Like you weren't sitting there thinking,
well, at least if there were those kind of conversations going on, I don't remember, or I wasn't a part of them. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think in jest we might do something like that, but not in any seriousness. Okay. I mean, wouldn't it be great if, we could just decide that, let's call the Heaviside Layer Rehab and send McCavity up there.
Yeah.
Get him out of the tribe.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fun piece. It's really the only reason the show exists and so many people listen to it is that there are a bunch of these theories, and it has kind of ended up on stage a little bit. To your point, you can't change the staging. You're not changing the dance numbers. You're not changing the lines, but you can change those improv moments, and you can change the looks you give. You could be smiling versus frowning, or you can be, pawing playfully versus aggressively. And that does kind of change a little bit of the arc of each character.
I do think that Victoria is always really drawn to Grizabella.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that she's courageous enough in those final moments when the rest of the tribe is still shunning her, that she stands up, even though she's one of the youngest cats there.
Mm-hmm. And so you don't see her as a mom,
that's as Grizabella, as Victoria's mother.
Yeah,
I never thought of her that way, but I felt my character was always really, really drawn to her.
Okay,
and so I think could be a potential. I mean, I would think more granddaughter. Grizabella's not, she's not just haggard. She's old.
Yeah.
At least that's the way that it was played at the time. Mm-hmm. Physically, not injured, but aged. She was aged. So an aged cat would not necessarily have a whatever, say 16-year-old daughter. Yeah. So I would say more grandmother, if anything, but I think it's fun to think about that. Who knows?
Well,
maybe
that's
she
all
is.
That's all the. I think that's what this show's about. My show's about. So I've thought about all the different versions of is she last year's Jokel choice? That's, I think, to me, one of the potentials is that.
Oh, I think that's very possible. Mm-hmm. I think that's an excellent, possibility. Yeah, for sure.
But none of this stuff is told to you. You're given one sentence, and then you're staging.
No, I mean, it's already very messy kind of, coalescence of all these elements. It's already that. So I think to bring in some of those things, there would be no way to explicitly have that be clear.
Yeah.
So I think the cool thing about that show is that I think they really brilliantly had enough information and enough vacuums that a viewer could fill with whatever other thoughts they might have to deepen or enrich in their experience with the piece, which is exactly what you've done.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it has to, I kind of like that it's ambiguous. I do think that there's some fun of that. And I have had some moments where I've sparked a debate online, and the audience is straight 50-50 in deciding between these two, which I think is really cool. I find that unique that it doesn't have to be, for the show to be successful, it doesn't have to be this person is sit in this box for this reason at this moment and nothing else. It is open-ended, and I think that's why so many fans relate to the show, because there's probably a character you can relate to, or at least a moment you can relate to that for your personal life, and I think that that's what resonates. Mm-hmm. I'm curious for you, I know you're a professor now. Do you teach, does cats ever end up in your courses?
No.
No. Okay.
I take that back. When I first started teaching at University of Texas, I taught musical theater dance. So I did teach a little bit of the Jellicle Ball, and I actually still have my old rehearsal tale that, when you start learning the show, they give you this tail so you can start learning how to either A, manipulate it, or B, learn to work with it. Because, especially for Victoria, there are times when you've got to do lifts and you're on your back and you've got to learn how to do that all with this thing on your back. So there were, in that sense, yes, but not beyond that, other than as an example of a, successful IP that, despite its uniqueness, it was a mega musical, wildly successful.
Yeah. Okay. And as someone who's produced, is it a dream of yours to ever produce this?
I don't know. I hadn't thought about it. I don't think that it would be available. If I were to produce it, I'd probably want to do a replica of the original, if that were ever to be allowed to do that again. Maybe build upon that, make it even more immersive than it was. And I think that would be super. Oh, it would. I'd be thrilled.
Well, I'll give you my idea of how I would like it to produce, which is I want to have a more immersive in the sense I want the audience to vote on the Jellicle choice each night. And so that's how I think we make it really immersive, is let the audience decide who gets to go up on the tire.
Gotcha.
Let's go to some rapid fire. So
okay.
If you could go on one night in the show, whether you're the right height, age, whatever, if you could just play one character for one night, who would you want to go on as?
Bombalurina.
Bombalurina,
just
singing
fun.
Cavity. Yeah.
Yeah, she's just beautiful. I love her costume and her wig and the makeup, the whole thing. And she's just fun. She's got a, carefree, sort of powerful female presence. And she gets to sing the Cavity, which is really a great fun song. And probably Bombalurina.
I love it. Who are your favorite and least favorite characters in the show? Which cats do you love and which cats do you dislike?
These are questions I've never pondered.
Yeah.
Well, my favorite cat was Victoria, because that's whom I played. Their cat I dislike. Do you mean the character, I guess?
Yeah, no, I don't want to. We're not going to throw actors and actresses.
No. I know. No.
If you're thinking about either as Victoria or just as you as Natasha, like, which is the personality of the cat that'd be like, I really can't stand this one?
I don't know that I had that. I had anyone that I didn't, a character that I didn't like engage. Well, I guess McCavity. I mean, he was mean. So.
Yeah, just the villain. I love it.
Yeah.
What's your favorite song from the show?
My favorite song from the show. Like the music or the number?
Either.
I would say that the number that I remember and was most satisfied doing would be the ball. Really exhausting, but it's just so many beautiful moments for Victoria that I love that number. I also really liked the opening number.
Yeah.
Like there are parts of the opening number, like when we're in a little clump, practical cats, practical.
Yeah.
I'm probably saying the lyrics wrong, but that one, I really liked that moment. Victoria's and my company was in the front for that. And it just, we were sort of introducing a lot of that feline movement. And I love the opening number.
Nice. Did you have a number, like a song, like a cat song that you liked the most?
In terms of the melody, I always loved, Memory.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the most iconic melodic lines in the show.
We're leading to what I think is not going to be I think you're going to disagree with me on the last question. But before that, I always ask one fun one in the rapid fire. So as a professor, which cat do you think would be the best professor?
The best professor. Probably Gus or Bustifer, As when I think of, and I by the way, I'm thinking of this in the context of Victorian England. Like if you were to take the cats in the context of the era that it was written, those poems were written, they sort of seem very professorial. And
I thought of Gus. The other two, I didn't think of Bustifer.
Or maybe Munkustrap. I mean, Munkustrap is kind of the leader narrator of this, and he's got a very powerful, calm leadership sort of presence throughout the show.
The two that came to mind, and for very different reasons, is I thought Skimbleshanks would keep a very orderly class.
Oh, he would. You want to think, but he's also very nervous and skittish. So it's one of those things. He's sort of OCD, right?
And then the professor I think that has the best like teacher ratings is probably Joey Lauren. I think Joey Lauren would be an excellent
she would
teacher and would care for her students and would be would have all the best ratings, but probably gave too many A's that the university didn't like.
She's too nice.
Yeah.
Joey Lauren would be great. I could see that. Yep. So those are excellent choices.
And the worst ones is Tugger and McCafferty.
Oh, right. They're the guys in the back that are like got their sunglasses on and are sleeping through class.
Or didn't even come. Yeah, they didn't even come to show.
If they came at all. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Let's ask the $1 million question. So the thesis of this podcast has been arguing that I don't think Grizabella is the right choice. So I want to hear, do you want to defend Grizabella as your Jellicle choice? And if so, why? And if not, who would be your Jellicle choice?
Okay. So you are right. I think that, the piece was written with specifically this arc of her song for her to be chosen. I mean, she has to be chosen in the context of this show that they wrote. So if someone else were to write a show in a different way, then I think, it's up for grabs. Could be any one of whatever cats that they created and whatever the songs were, to be. But in this particular composition, I think it has to be Grizabella. However, I heard you say that you felt like she needed to go the next year. And I was going to say that, how there's time on stage is contracted. So there is, I don't know how many seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, where Grizabella, after Victoria touches her and she's chosen, she goes around and is, engaging with the other cats. They're all turning around. Yeah. That in stage year, that's a year in stage time. So she is getting that moment because it's all contracted, right? So those many seconds are her re-engaging with the community before she goes up to be, transformed and reborn again. So I'm sort of agreeing with you on the year she did, but she does get that moment.
Okay, so you're picking Grizabella still.
I'm still picking Grizabella and arguing that she does get that sort of those moments with those cats again. And it's just longer, than you think it is.
Yeah, so that's fascinating. So that's a very interesting counter argument to my current debate.
Like, because you say she is, I think she does. And I do think the new cats that come into the tribe, like Victoria, she could very well be last year's choice. I think that's I could see that absolutely.
So I love that. I love that the line that she gets to go through where she gets to interact with each cat.
That's a year.
A full year. Okay,
it's a full year. In stage
we get like 15 seconds on stage, or we get a year. That means that the ball is like 20 years, 30
That's
years.
Right. Like everybody ages.
Yeah,
from that ball, like a couple of years.
So I want to ask this question then, because I think this is what granted, these are all very unanswerable questions. I'm very aware of that. What's Old Deuteronomy's criteria? Because like I get the story arc of Grizabella and that she's picked. But is there another cat, like next year? Is there another cat that was banished that's going to get picked? Or like, how's he choosing next year?
Well, I think in the case of Grizabella, it's because she needs it. Do you know what? She needs it. And then maybe Deuteronomy believes that she's ready. Like you have to be ready for transformation and choose transformation. I mean, she could have just stayed in the shadows and never come out and tried to re-engage with the Jellicle cats, but she does. So maybe that's the fact that she did that is what helped her character cross the Rubicon into being chosen rather than not being chosen.
Okay. So that would eliminate, because Gus also needs it, but
he does need it.
Maybe isn't as ready.
Could be. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, it could be.
And this is never discussed, right? Like this is nothing. It's something you're never thinking about.
No, we never went like, how come it's Grizabella? Yeah, he would need that 11th hour song too. We'd need to know a little bit more about him, I suppose.
Yeah, I love this question because I think as a Victoria, you're not being picked. You're not ready. It's like not part of the arc at all. But there are there's a Gus and a bunch of others. And it's like, all right, how did you sell yourself on like, why not me today? And it's an interesting piece of it because we're only given, well, in your new theory, we're only given maybe a couple of years, but we're given one ball, we're given one choice, and we're given that timeline, and that's it to understand this whole universe and decision and this ritual. And it's, to me, it's almost like it's really challenging because of that. And granted, this all started as a joke because I just saw Leona Lewis and I was like, this is the X Factor. And so that's how I wanted to vote. That's why I want to vote. I still want to vote version of this. But then as I've dug through this more, I'm like, well, how was last year's choice made? How's next year's choice made? There's not that answered. And I think it's a really interesting question. And I'm glad that I'm now slowly starting to get people to think about it, because I want to understand, in this universe that was created, what does that look like? Yeah. And how do they think about it?
It's sort of, who do you choose to help?
Yeah.
Who are you going to rally around this year? And maybe every ball has a different type of person that they're going to help for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
It would never be Victoria because she just got there.
Yeah.
She's brand new. It's not going to be the kittens unless something, horrible happened to them and they need to, their journey is going to be short in the life of that cat.
Yeah.
So,
well, there's a whole other conversation that can go around that. As if Victoria was truly last year, what was her, what's the
who
prequel?
was she before? Well, I think she's brand new.
You think she's new? So you don't think this was her being reborn?
Well, I think being reborn is you're brand new. You're a clean slate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another thing you think about with Victoria. She's pure and all the things that kind of go with the connotations of that.
Yeah. But I want to know what her story was before she was sent to the Heaviside Layer, because she's coming back as Victoria.
Yeah, she's coming back.
Was she a Grizabella arc where she left and was banished and got her redemption?
I don't know. It's very interesting because, they start the movie that way,
mm-hmm.
with Victoria being abandoned, which, didn't really connect with how I always thought of the show. I mean, I love that they made Victoria a more central character. I thought that was very cool, only because I had played Victoria. But the backstory on her was that she was from in a very well-to-do, fancy house. She has the nice pink collar and she's so clean and well taken care of and innocent and protected. And so that was the only thing that didn't align a little bit with me in terms of her story arc in the film.
Oh, there's a lot of stuff in the film that doesn't
the film
align.
is just, listen, so many talented people working on that, but I did think it was a bit of a missed opportunity. Also, I love Andy Blankenbuehler's work and that director's work, but I think some of the elements that made the original really resonant were missing there. And also something, I also did Beauty and the Beast for Disney. Mm-hmm. And I learned a very valuable lesson that was articulated so well by the folks that directed us. You have to keep really grounded in the truth of your character and the truth of the story here. Otherwise, your character becomes a caricature.
Interesting.
And the costumes already take care of that fantasy world that you're in. You don't need to do anything about that. You don't need to amplify that. You need to keep the truth of the kind of human part of your character, the strongest part of your performance.
Yeah.
So that it doesn't become superficial and silly and, again, a caricature as opposed to a deeply rooted character.
Yeah, that's a really interesting quote and piece, because I do think the movie missed to me, not because of the talent of the people, but because of the way it was edited. I just didn't get to see the choreography the way I would want to. I didn't get to see the dancing the way, because it was just moving around so frequently that it was hard to follow. And they made some edits and some choices that were very different to me, the plot and the actual story. And a lot of weird general decisions of why is this cat huge and then tiny and huge and then tiny and all this other, there's a lot of other things. But I love the idea of you're already in a cat suit. You're already doing the cat's mannerisms. You're taught that.
Mm-hmm.
Stick to being Victoria. And
exactly.
You'll be able to land Victoria's story, not Victoria the cat, but Victoria. That's a really, really, really sound advice.
It was. And I know that for Beauty and the Beast, again, they would tell us that you can so easily start going just for the gags and all of that. And don't do that, because you kind of lose the heart of the story. I mean, in that show, I was in the German premiere company, so I did get the chance to learn it as a whole group. And I had an ensemble track where I'm like a townslady, a wolf, a plate, a napkin, and then I also played Babette, who's the feather duster. But, you have to play to the character of Babette, not the feather duster.
Yeah.
Otherwise, she's just going to be, again, I mean, not nearly as resonant. So, and I think the same was true of cats. But they were, it was, I think the same, Richard Stafford was also maintained our show, and I think he's still involved in it. But he did a really great job of keeping the show on track. And every now and then they would even change something in choreography that you were so used to doing that you had to be on your toes. It was a great strategy to keep everybody, not phoning it in, as it were.
Yeah, especially when you're traveling around and you're doing it 8 times a week or more, and you're...
Oh, it's exhausting. I don't think people necessarily understand how tiring it is. Not only the schedule, because when you're on the road, depending on how many times you're moving cities. I mean, we would stay for months. Like when we go to some of the bigger cities, we stayed in San Francisco for a while, or we might have 2 cities in 1 week, have a split week. And so when you combine the travel with the show, we often didn't get a day off that wasn't about the show. So that's tiring. And then because it's so physically grueling, at least my body, every time I woke up, I'd be like, it was hard to get out of bed because
it's got to be some of the best shape you're ever in, right? Like it's
you are. And I will say that I don't think, depending on the choreography, it didn't suit everybody's body. I got through that show without injury. I mean, I did get a broken finger at one point because somebody kicked me, but I never had any injury from doing the show. But for some people, that was hard. I think it was hard on however their body just happened to be made. Because, choreography is not balanced. It could have, 25 batmas on the right leg and none on the left.
Yeah.
And, so you can start to get a little imbalanced that way. So we would work really hard to, maintain your body so it didn't start compensating and then you have a problem. And then, so I was pretty lucky that way. But we worked hard at it. I mean, I was doing all kinds of, massage work and physical therapy and exercise and stretching to, mitigate any problems.
It is fascinating. It's one of the things that when I saw it the very first time was one of the biggest takeaways, besides the story where I'm like, what did I watch? Is I kept thinking like, these performers are working so hard for so long with no break. I was just amazed. As like, I grew up playing hockey, and hockey is a sprint. So it's, you're on for 30 seconds, you're off for a minute. And I've always I couldn't run a marathon today, but I could run a marathon if you let me do it that way. And I'm watching these performers and I'm like, I assumed theater was kind of similar. Like you get your moments on stage, you get your moments off. You get your moments on stage, you get your moments off. And I'm like, nope, these cats are on the entire time.
Pretty
you are
much.
just dancing
even
nonstop.
In the second act, you're placed somewhere in the set.
Yeah.
I mean, you're basically a part of the set, a living part of the set. But some people got really lucky and they could sort of be in the tunnel. They could probably even take a nap. But, I was usually on the tire. I think I spent a lot of the second act kind of on the tire or right in front of the car trunk, pretty visible. Well, and you're white. I mean, that was the thing.
Yeah. You can't blend. You don't blend at all. There
was literally no hiding for me in my character, which I loved, but it was also a big responsibility. And I used to get that note a lot. They're like, listen, when everybody's on stage and they're dancing, everyone's looking at you because you're the only one that's that solid, bright, and with the lights on it, it just glows. And so there's a standard, of execution. You're sort of setting that standard.
Yeah.
So that was great because it's easier to be in the front row. You have a little bit more space up in the front, which was nice than having to be in the back. But there, you also have the responsibility.
Yeah, you're also the front. So.
You're also in the front. So.
Wow, this has been super fun. I love reminiscing. I love hearing different parts. I love the line, Grizabella's line is her year. That's something I have not thought about. So that's a fun piece to maybe bring to the future. I'll be thinking about that for a while, which is not good. I already think about the show an unhealthy amount of time. So,
well, you know what? I think I heard one of your podcasts where somebody was saying doing site-specific cats, and I do think that is a super cool idea on a variety of levels. Like not only to possibly revitalize some sort of declining building or structure or neighborhood or something, but that's sort of that's what's going to the heaviside layer. You're bringing this exciting piece of theater to a place that might need a little love.
Yeah.
And by
It's
doing
like
that, although it's, there's a lot of challenges with site-specific work, but I think that like this show really lends itself to that if you do it.
Yeah, because I mean, it's a junkyard. So it's like, where could you build a
junkyard.
junkyard somewhere else is a fascinating kind of idea of doing it. But it adds a whole different, as put on your producer hat, a whole different layer of like, how do you make that work? But there's a lot of interesting ways, I think, to not fully reimagine, but tweak the show. Mm-hmm. But I also, at the same time, to your point, it's been so successful. It's so revolutionary. That's why they don't tweak it too far. Mm-hmm. So as much as I want an Edwin Drew style different ending each night, like I'm not sure I'm ever going to get that. I'm going to keep pushing for it. That's my goal.
It could be, and you know how it could be at an after show, like the show's the show, and then you have a little post-production kind of thing where maybe that I could see that being super fun and
come out after.
The audience chooses, that kind of thing. I don't know. It's interesting. What I do love is that there's still conversation about this show and that people are still iterating it and doing their own take on it. And I think that all of that is just fabulous.
Yeah. And the fans love it still. I get messages all the time with like, here's this little nugget that you talked about, but did you know this? I'm like, I did not know that. That's awesome. So it's really cool to hear how everyone kind of thinks about it. And there's just so much, the levels and layers of it's been going on in so many countries and so many different places that there are nuances everywhere.
I would say that you are never going to run out of people to talk to. So that show ran for so long. And I think because it was such a heavy dance show, you have a little bit more attrition and turnover, because not many people can do it for a decade, although some people did.
Yeah.
I think including a Victoria. I think one of the Victorias on Broadway did it a really long time. There are a plethora of folks that you could talk to, that did the German companies or the Mexican company or the Paris company.
I kind of originally said I'll keep doing this until people stop talking to me. And then I don't know when this one's going to come out, but as of today, I have, I think 6 extra recorded. So like that aren't even out yet. So I have 3 more recording this weekend. So there are endless amounts of people that want to, and thankfully people are enjoying this and like to have this conversation, and it's been fun. So I will keep recording until people do not want to record with me anymore, but I have a feeling that'll be a long time.
Now and forever.
So
well, I love talking to you about it. It's been a while, but it was a big part of my life. I love the piece. And again, I love that there's still conversation about it and still it's still out there and on tour, I think. Is it still out on tour?
Just finished tour. I don't know if it's going back out, but it is on Royal Caribbean still currently.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, fantastic.
Taiwan Asia tour just finished, but I don't know if they're going back out. It was, there's always production. So I think there was Vienna was on for a while. There was an international tour for a while. I always just assume that I'm going to see people holding their contract with the books soon of like, here's the next tour going out. But I think it's currently running at least 2 places right now.
That's fantastic. And I know it's regional. It's done regionally now, which took a long time for it to get there. I've actually seen it in high schools as well.
Yeah, there's a junior production.
Okay.
That I only know of because I'm from Indiana, and they're doing it either end of this year, early next year for 2 nights. And I'm like, tell me more. Like, how do you do a junior production? I don't know anything about that. So trying to understand a little bit more about what even that looks like. But yeah, there's just, again, endless versions of this.
Endless versions. You've got lots of people to talk to.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. This was super fun. So thanks for being here.
Oh, I had a blast. Thank you so much for asking.
And thanks everyone else for listening to this episode of The Wrong Cat Died, the podcast breakdown of the catastrophe. To follow along, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else listen to podcasts. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at The Wrong Cat Died, or check out our website, thewrongcatdied.com.